G'day! I just recorded this whole thing and the microphone wasn't turned on. Somebody told me it's Mercury retrograde. That makes a lot of sense because all of my electronics are haywire. I can't speak. I'm going to trip over my tongue. Maybe not as much this time as in the last intro that you will never see that I recorded, but nonetheless, here I am. So much for trying to get this out on Tuesday, Election Day. What a week we're having. Anyway, I'm getting it done. So I would suggest that you always plan to have a Friday night, Saturday night, or Sunday night movie. I don't think you're ever going to get a Thursday night movie from me if you want to watch the intro first. And my cat Dean is joining us this time. I already kicked him out for a while and his feelings got hurt. So this big black blob is my cat Dean. So anyway, let's proceed, shall we? And let's talk about The Last Wave. And I want to give you a little bit more information about the director this time around because Peter Weir is an international icon. He's not only a celebrated Australian director, but of course known across the world for many films. And as I get further into his career, you will know why, and you will remember that you've seen a lot of his films, in fact. So our film this week, The Last Wave, was directed in 1977. It is the third feature film from Peter Weir, and it is definitely a highly regarded film of the Australian New Wave, which I mentioned to you in the intro for this course. And Weir was a leading figure in Australian New Wave, as well as later films that are a little more mainstream, but also were quite celebrated. And so the Australian New Wave ran from 1970 to 1990, and that's you know, a few decades, but it wouldn't include as many films as you would think because, as I mentioned, there just weren't a lot of Australian films being made ever in Australia in comparison to United States or some European countries or some Asian countries who are churning out tons. India, right, is churning out tons of films all the time. So anyway, it's you know, a rather long period of time for a movement, a film movement, but it is you know, just peppered with some real gems that I think that you might want to see in addition to the features that I'm showing you. So Peter Weir's first film, his first feature-length film, was the underground cult classic The Cars That Ate Paris from 1974, which I mentioned in my intro last week. And this was a low-budget, dark comedy horror film about the residents of a small country town who deliberately cause fatal car crashes and then live off of whatever proceeds result from these crashes, be it items that they might scavenger from the deceased or whatever. And so it doesn't take place in Paris. It's not about cars actually eating anyone, contrary to the poster itself, but it embodies that idea that I mentioned earlier in the intro about the Gothic, the outback Gothic, and these really crazy people who are out in the outback and they'll get you. And Peter Weir actually got the idea for this film when he was driving through Paris and or he was going to Paris and he was driving through all of the little towns that you go through to get there, and he was struck by how kind of creepy and eerie they were, and I think his imagination ran away with him. And I think there was also a news report at the time of two women that went missing while they were on a road trip heading toward Paris, and perhaps they ended up in one of these towns. So this was the impetus for him to imagine what that scenario would look like in the Australian outback, which certainly is filled with unique and unusual characters. The film itself struggled when it was in Australian cinemas, but it was a very big success at the Cannes Film Festival. And ironically, it was very popular also at the drive-in movie circuit. So I guess people in cars were enjoying watching people being killed in cars. It's considered a cult film, which I just want to make sure that if anybody doesn't know what a cult film is, it certainly does not mean any kind of group you have to join. It merely means that whatever the art piece is, whether it's a film, music, a band, some art, perhaps a novel or poetry even, it has cult status when it appeals to a very kind of select segment of society, people who enjoy things that are on the fringe and are very far from the mainstream idea of what you might expect from some of these genres. So it's just kind of a group of weird people who like weird stuff. So it's a cult film, an underground film, and in fact, director Stanley Kubrick, included this film on his list of his 93 favorite films. So I guess he couldn't think of 7 more films just to make it an even 100. He could only think of 93, and this was one of them. Not only is The Cars That Ate Paris part of the Australian New Wave, but it also falls into the category of the Ozploitation genre that I also mentioned in the intro. And just to clarify, the reason we're getting Oz, O-Z, from it's an informal way of referring to Australia. So if you take the word Australia and you shorten it to Aussie, or even shorter to AUS, Oz, it sounds like Oz. So they just went ahead and did OZ, Oz. So that's what it means. And probably some of you know that. But in fact, wasn't Hugh Jackman in a musical called The Boy from Oz? So I bet that was about Australia. I didn't see it, but I don't think that, perhaps Dorothy Gale and her whirling house actually ended up in Australia. That could be. Why not? Certainly a lot of strange things happen in the outback. Weir's major breakthrough film was his second film, 1975's film Picnic at Hanging Rock. And this is one of those films that was made with a tremendous amount of financial backing from the Australian government, which I mentioned needed to happen in order to revitalize the Australian film industry. So, and that's what made the Australian New Wave possible, is that the government gave them money, and many countries in the world set aside funds for filmmakers to further the arts, and our government sort of does that here. It's a little differently set up, but mostly we have to get grants and funding from other sources and things, but the government does give a little bit of money, although it's always very controversial because nobody wants any arts in our country. Anyway, so this film was made, thank goodness, with the help of the government. It's based on a novel by Joan Lindsay, and it tells this supposedly true story of a group of students from an exclusive girls' school who mysteriously vanish from a school picnic on Valentine's Day in the year of 1900. And the Victorian sensibility is going to be something you will see a lot of in Weir's early work. He really likes the clash between the prim white Victorian mindset and the very dark, unusual, and often terrifying landscape of native Australia. So Picnic at Hanging Rock was widely credited as a key film in the Australian film Renaissance, and it received critical praise and was released internationally everywhere. So it's a quite well-known film. It's a very interesting film. I don't know if I found a full-length feature on YouTube for it, but I might have. Check back to the playlist sometime, because I've been looking for those things so that you can watch them for free if you don't feel like renting them, or they might not be available. Peter Weir's next film, his third film, is the feature film that we'll be watching this week, The Last Wave, filmed in 1977. And this is a supernatural thriller about a man who begins to experience these sort of terrifying nightmares, these visions of an impending natural disaster or perhaps apocalypse. And we don't know. We'll have to find out. Or maybe we won't find out. But I'll tell you more about The Last Wave later on. The film that really scored Peter Weir even more international and this time more mainstream success was the 1981 film historical action, I'm sorry, adventure drama. That's that Mercury retrograde. I'm gonna have a little sip of tea. Hold on. Okay. So I don't want to do that on camera because it's very unattractive and not very ladylike. Okay, so Gallipoli, filmed in 1981, is regarded as a classic in Australian cinema, and of course was instrumental in making Mel Gibson a superstar, and really brought Weir to this even more international success, but in a little bit more of a mainstream way than his previous films might have done. The climax of this early period of Weir's work came the following year in 1982 with the film The Year of Living Dangerously, which again starred Mel Gibson playing opposite Sigourney Weaver and, of course, Linda Hunt, who I mentioned in the intro. I have cat hair on my face now. Linda Hunt, who plays a man in the film and won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress for that role. And it's a story about really about journalistic loyalty and idealism. It has love in there, ambition, and it's all in this turmoil of 1965. It's set in Indonesia with the attempted coup that was happening during that time, and it's based. A lot of that film is based on real accounts from a couple of journalists who were there during that upheaval. After The Year of Living Dangerously, Peter Weir kind of shifted gears and he began to work more internationally instead of just his films being seen in other countries. And his first American film is a film that I know that you know, Witness from 1985, starring Harrison Ford. And it's a very interesting, Witness is a gorgeous film, but if you think about it, it's a preposterous idea, truly. A little Amish boy witnesses a murder and then is sort of taken into police custody, but then the cop becomes a target, so he must take the boy and run away to Amish country and hide from these murderers. It's a pretty wild idea, but I don't think any of us ever felt like it was, and that's because Peter Weir knows how to direct a film. And if you remember that film, it's just the cinematography is astounding. It's very atmospheric. You really buy into the story and the characters, and there's a lot of silence in that movie, and that's something Peter Weir knows how to use like an expert. You don't just need to be talking all the time. So, and it also, you'll see, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later, but there's this sense of isolation, right? Ford's character goes off and he's in this brand new world. He doesn't know what's going on there, isolated from what he knows. The same thing with Picnic at Hanging Rock. These schoolgirls, these Victorian schoolgirls, get lost in the Australian outback. They're thrust into this world they don't know. Everyone's isolated. And remember in the intro, I told you that the Australian identity is about isolation, and clearly that's topographical because of where they are. They're just far away from everyone. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Anyway, Witness actually was the only film that Harrison Ford has ever been nominated for an Oscar for, and that film was also nominated for Best Picture and Best Director, and then, yeah, that's it. So then the following film that Weir made also starred Harrison Ford, and I really liked this film. I don't know if a lot of people saw it, but it was called The Mosquito Coast, and it stars Harrison Ford along with Helen Mirren and a very young River Phoenix. And again, it's this story of this it's a story of this man, this time a scientist, who takes his family out into the jungle. So they leave this world they know and they're thrust into this world they don't understand. So these are physical changes for all of the characters in all of the films I've mentioned so far. They're put like a fish out of water, right? But much deeper than that. We usually say fish out of water for a comedy of some kind. But these are dramas, very intense, serious psychological dramas as well. Other Academy Award nominated films from Peter Weir that you will also recognize include the drama Dead Poets Society in 1989, the 1990 romantic comedy Green Card with Gerard Depardieu and Andie MacDowell, And the psychological drama Fearless, which I think that was in 1993. I don't know how many people saw Fearless. I loved Fearless. I actually think I've seen Fearless 2 or 3 times, starring Jeff Bridges and Rosie Perez. And it's the story of these two passengers. They don't know each other, but they're on this flight, this airplane flight, and it crashes, and they're the only two people who survive. And so it's sort of about their survivor's guilt, but not generically so. And in fact, Jeff Bridges' character begins to believe that he can't be killed, that he's immortal, and he starts testing this theory, and it seems to be true. So he's kind of going cuckoo, and everyone around him's like, dude, that's not possible. And he's like, oh yeah, it is. And then Rosie Perez her character is in deep mourning because she had her child with her on the plane. The child didn't survive, so she's blaming herself for not being able to save her child. And so she's shut down, and Jeff Bridges' character is really exploding, and they come together in this very, very interesting way. It's very psychological, and again, it has that theme of isolation. She's isolated in her grief. He's isolated in his sort of delusion, and they're both isolated from everyone in the world because very few people know what it's like to survive a plane crash. Again, the theme of isolation. And in fact, Rosie Perez was nominated for an Oscar for her performance in that film, and many people feel like it's one of Jeff Bridges' best performances. So see Fearless if you haven't, but don't watch it on a plane. If that's the movie, don't go. Don't get on a plane anyway, not at least for another year or two, unless you're going to wear a bubble. Peter Weir also directed the social science fiction drama, The Truman Show, if you remember that. I love that movie, and it really was prescient, wasn't it? Because right after that, we began getting a slew of these reality shows and these Big Brother things. And so at the time, Truman Show seemed crazy, and now it seems pat. It just seems like, oh yeah, what? But it was quite a revolutionary idea at the time. And also, I'm not a huge fan of Jim Carrey's comedy, but I do like him as a dramatic actor. So you might want to check out The Truman Show if you haven't seen that. It also has, gosh, I can't think of his name right now. Ed Harris. I love that guy. And finally, in 2003, Peter Weir directed the epic historical drama Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World, which was a Napoleonic film, a war drama film, starring Russell Crowe, that was very much praised by critics and even received an Oscar nomination for Best Picture. But I honestly had never heard of it that I can recall before doing research for this class. So, and when I looked it up, it said that audiences just didn't seem interested in it. So I think a lot of people didn't see it, but apparently it's quite good. So if you like Napoleonic War films, that's probably what did it. Don't put that on the poster. Oops. They put it on the poster. So all of these films that I've mentioned from Peter Weir, again, are right in line with that theme of isolation, either people being removed physically from society, as in Witness, Mosquito Coast, Truman Show, or culturally, Picnic at Hanging Rock, The Last Wave, Dead Poet Society, Green Card, or psychologically, which would be Fearless. So all of them have that isolation in them. Now to The Last Wave. So The Last Wave is this very pensive mystery drama, and it kind of expands on some of the themes from A Picnic at Hanging Rock, mostly when it focuses on the interactions between the native Aboriginal people and then the white colonist settlers. The story itself centers on a white solicitor in Sydney, played by Richard Chamberlain, whose life is disrupted after he takes on a murder case there's an Aboriginal tribesman murdered, and he takes on the case. And as he delves deeper into his investigation and really becomes a part of that world, he starts experiencing these strange and mystical connections with this tribe of Aboriginal men who are accused of a crime. And one of them becomes his sort of spirit guide, and he is played by David Gulpilil. And I think I said it incorrectly in my intro, Gulpilil. Man, too many L's, Gopilil, and I do apologize, Mr. Gopilil. I mentioned him before. He and Gopilil in real life is a skilled tribal dancer, and he also made his film debut in one of the very first films of the Australian New Wave, Walkabout, which I mentioned in my intro. That was in 1971, and he shot to great critical acclaim from that film. And actually, Walkabout as well is the story of two white school children who are fending for themselves in the Australian outback, and then they ask this Aboriginal teenager, played by Gopilil, to help them. So again, it's this kind of clash of white and black and being lost in the Gothic outback and all of this stuff. So many of the same kind of ideas. The film also, I don't want to be remiss in noting that this The Last Wave also features a performance, the only performance on screen, from Northern Australian tribal magistrate Najawara Amagula. And in fact, Peter Weir consulted both Galilpil and Amagula about the script for The Last Wave, and he incorporated their reactions into the finished product. So I can't, I guess, I've kind of already stated this, but I don't know, but it can't really be overstated enough. But specifically in The Last Wave, we really do see this clash of that kind of Australia's white button-down Victorian culture, and that butting heads right up against the mysteries of this landscape that is occupied by Aboriginal people. And in both Picnic at Hanging Rock and The Last Wave, you actually see these white protagonists kind of being swallowed up by this native culture around them in this really foreign landscape. Even though they claim it as their own, they don't know much about it, do they? They just kind of sat down on top of another culture and said, this looks good. But underneath, there's all of this mystery that they don't know about and often aren't interested in whatsoever. The girls in Picnic at Hanging Rock are really swallowed up by that rocky landscape where they're picnicking. And similarly, Richard Chamberlain's character really dives deep. He really enters the bowels of Sydney to disappear into these Aboriginal caves. So I think you're really going to find this interesting as far as getting information on some of the Aboriginal culture in Australia. There's some wonderful artworks that they show as well, are very interesting at least. And one of the more recent modern criticisms of the film is that the Aboriginal tribesmen and characters are portrayed a bit stereotypically. I don't know, because I've never been there and I haven't seen enough Aboriginal films, but it would make sense in 1977, not quite as sophisticated, that would happen to a certain degree. And but I'm just happy that we get to have a film with some of that culture. And again, what I'm looking for is our films told from the Aboriginal perspective. What we're going to only get is a look at that culture, but seen through white eyes. So if you ever run across a really great film that we're looking at it through that other perspective, then please let me know, because I would very much like to see that. What else? So just like in Picnic at Hanging Rock, The Last Wave really takes a look at that Australian culture and its fixation with starched white clothes and cricket and perfect lawns and all that, and it really comes off as seeming kind of ludicrous when you bump it up against the surroundings in which they live. It just doesn't fit, right? It's like in California having a lawn, you're watering your lawn in the desert, although we've made it work pretty well. And we're, by pushing these two cultures up against each other, he really builds this wonderful mood of kind of dread and anxiety throughout the film. And again, his cinematography is really striking, and there's also quite an interesting sound design. Most of all, what I think is interesting about The Last Wave is its insistence, really, that spiritual life is tangible. And Peter Weir even was quoted as saying, after he was asked, well, how did he come up with this idea to make this film? And he said, quote, he said to himself, what if someone with a very pragmatic approach to life experienced a premonition? Now, it sounds very simple, and he takes it way further than that. Um, but it embodies that idea, right? Of we don't know anything about where our country, and I'm a very pragmatic person. Everything in the 3D is what counts. Spirituality is like, maybe you go to church, maybe you don't. But then you have this whole other group of people who live and breathe spirituality and mysticism. And who's to say that what they're doing is delusional? Maybe what the white people are doing is delusional. Maybe there's a common ground. Maybe these two ideas meet somewhere and there's a way to live in both worlds. But I don't think we're going to find that in this film. And as Richard Chamberlain's character moves away from his very structured life in white society, and he's steeping himself in this Aboriginal history, he really is drawn in by their ideas and the reality of what they're doing. It is real. And he actually begins to have this connection within himself. His dreams or maybe nightmares seem to be filled with the Aboriginal ideas and spirituality. He perhaps is having premonitions. Is he dreaming something and then it happens the next day in some fashion? Or is this all in his mind? And when he's having his final visions, are they true or are they just dreams? Peter Weir is not going to answer that question for us, but he's going to give us all the information that we need to try to parse it out among ourselves. And the goal isn't to get an answer, right? That's very white starched shirt. I need an answer. There must be an equation. There probably isn't a real answer to that, but it's something to contemplate. And I think translates into any time period. I think right now there are a lot of people who are reevaluating their very 3D, very structured life and saying, wow, that was sort of stupid. I've kind of been doing a lot of things that aren't really important, and maybe looking more in themselves or at other people and trying to find a more sort of humanistic and possibly spiritual connection to other people. I don't know. It depends on who you are and what you're looking for. What else? So, yeah, I think that's it. And one of the characters in this film, a white guy, says to Richard Chamberlain that city Aboriginals are no different culturally than depressed whites. And it's really the opposite. What this film, I think, if nothing else, says is that the Aboriginal peoples really possess a powerful, separate, and more spiritual identity that that white people might be ignoring at their own peril. Da-na-na. Sound effects. All right. I hope you enjoy Peter Weir's 1977 film, The Last Wave. And I really look forward to talking to you more about it soon. Okay. Have a great weekend, everyone. Stay calm. Everything will be fine. Bye.